Welcome to yet another episode of Not Yet Mature, the podcast series talking about life and business, the mix between the two, and hopefully allowing the entrepreneur and founder to find some insights of what the path looks like, or rather should look like ahead. XCAP has a vision that the ethical business that is formed around servitude and relational transactions should be given the advantage to exit the finite space and enter the infinite games. This, collectively, is our mission and our goal. Without further delay, let's dive into today's chat. Here with me, your host, founder of Exemplo Capital, Dion Richter. Like and subscribe. You know, the usual.
Arguably the biggest socio-con, and I don't even think that's a word for the everyday consumer, the you and me, is the tipping culture. And here's a disclosure. I'm not saying keep your wallets closed or telling you to light your pitchforks and refrain from being a gracious giver. I don't think that's the point for today. But is tipping killing the South African business in the long run? It's one of those things that companies just do, or they just offer their staff and we just accept, because after all, we have the right to say no, right? Or do we? When we talk about tipping, the first thing that comes to mind is you order food at a restaurant, the bill comes, and depending on how well you were served, meaning the quality of food, and the mood after 3 beers of listening to your toddlers the whole night nagging, I want a 5 rand for the ball machine. You add your 10%, sometimes more. And depending on the aforementioned factors, you can give less or you can give none, right? That is, after all, what we think about when it comes to tipping, the SOP in food or hospitality industries. But everywhere you go nowadays, from vendors, food merchants, and especially coffee shops, to curio crafts, you are welcomed by this presence of that bright greenish blue machine, a sheep-like glare from the teller shoving YOCO in your face with the phrase, please select an option, withholding a smile till you completed your tipping survey and gradually releasing that smile depending on the option that you chose, right? I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one in that boat. I hope I'm definitely not the only one in that boat. Before I go on, I am all for the origination of the tipping principle. You know, the restaurant service industry and the ability to offer graciously what was not expected or what wasn't mandatory. But I do feel that emotionally and psychologically, the option is not really there anymore. It's a way how corporates can grow the profit-investor ratio by letting you fund the employee's next big break. It's harsh words, it's controversial feelings, but stick around and you will see why, in my opinion, it's creating a psychological bad experience that's kind of like overwriting the norm of how we do things. So, where did tipping originate from? How did it become part of our daily lives? And what should companies be aware of? What is your role in the matter? And what can employees do to still get that kind of like exceptional tips they were promised when signing up in the role or to the role? So, let's have a look on where tipping originated from. Medieval Europe. That's the earliest roots. The first known form of tipping began in feudal Europe, particularly in England. Wealthy aristocrats would give vails, small sums of money, to servants for good service. It was essentially a status gesture, a way for the upper class to show generosity and reinforce hierarchy. Now, it's important to remember here that it was intended to be given to someone of service that A, delivered the service, and B, measured on the quality of service given. Which brings us to the 17th and 18th century England. This is where the practice was formalized. The term tip is believed to come from British slang meaning to give, to pass, or to hand over. Taverns began placing tipping jars or tip jars labeled TIP to ensure promptitude. And by the 18th century, tipping was widespread in English hospitality. Now we need to move onwards to Trump Town, a rival in the United States and kind of like the controversy. After the Civil War, 1860s to 1870s, wealthy Americans traveling to Europe imported the habit back home. But tipping exploded in the US because of darker reasons. It became a method for employees to avoid paying wages, especially to newly freed black workers. Now let's pause here for a moment. The model of commission only derived from this, meaning you only get paid when someone gives, so make the experience great. This led to what we see today in most sales jobs advertised. You only get paid when doing a sale. They mask it with words like unlimited earning potential, and that model does have its place. In today's episode, we're mostly looking at the tipping side of things and not the sales pitch to kind of like sales pitches, if you know what I mean. So let's move back to the why on the American soil. Many industries, especially railroads, restaurants, and hospitality, employed formerly enslaved people. Employers argued workers should survive off tips instead of wages, reinforcing a racially charged system of dependence. This is why the US became one of the only countries where tipping replaced wages, rather than supplementing them. Through the Dark Era movement, yes, actually historic movement started. That's actually what Americans love most. We see the anti-tipping movement starting. Believe it or not, in the early 1900s, 6 US states temporarily banned tipping. Writers called it undemocratic, a relic of caste system, and un-American. But the hospitality industry resisted, in a sense, rightfully so, and by the 1920s, tipping was fully normalized. Then fast forward later, we see the modern global split. Today, USA, Canada, South Africa, tipping is expected because base wages are often low, which is in essence still fine, as the law stipulates a base fare or minimum wages act, yet still I'm in favor of the main kingdom purpose of a company to create opportunities and to feed the people. So it's good to be employed, and it's good for a business to have opportunities to offer. So yet again, the tipping culture on this backdrop is welcomed. Then we look at Japan, South Korea, Australia, Scandinavia, France, those type of countries. Tipping is minimal or sometimes even rude because workers earn fair wages and pride themselves on service without extra incentives. In better known terms, the governments and corporates take it upon themselves to look after their people better. This, of course, is the ideal and even more welcomed by us. But economical status plays a massive role in this realization. So let's explore the why the culture exists in different countries and dive a bit deeper into that. Let's have a look at which countries tip and why they do. Countries with strong company cultures include America, Canada, I've mentioned it before, South Africa especially here, and some Middle Eastern countries like UAE, Saudi, as kind of like adopted this from the Western influence. Why do they do it? Well, first of all, there's the historically low base wages in hospitality. There's the European influence, colonial or cultural. There's service roles seen as entry level rather than long-term careers. And then we see businesses shifting wage responsibility to customers. And I think that's the kind of like intro of my point here today. This is generally by first, the problem that I see back home. It's one thing to offer a model where it is allowed and a model for people practicing gracious giving, a skill lost by many and shamefully said many Christians as well. But on the other hand, and what we find here now is exactly the responsibility shift. Corporates would offer minimum pay, not because they cannot afford a larger payout. We've talked about, paying people's worth plenty of times, but because they rather want to focus on higher margins and expect the consumer to fill the gap, quite literally. Let me tell you a story. Quite a literal happening in my life. I went to the mall the other day. After the mall, I went to the gym. You might think in the story, you spoiled brat. Especially in this example. And I'm okay with that. So, I stopped underground to get my car washed. For reference, underground is paid parking, and the purpose, or rather supposed purpose, in underground parking is there's a boom gates, it's secure, and that's why you pay. And I'm perfectly fine with that. So in I go. I buy my things and of course grabbed a coffee. Feel free to judge. As I'm buying my coffee, I'm welcomed by this YOCO. I tipped, received, coffee burnt my mouth beyond the ability to verbally articulate my F in trying to exclaim how bad that was. And I moved on. By the exit, there's a Krispy Kreme. And I thought to treat the family. I ordered a box, welcomed by the machine with a sheep clear from the cashier. Please select your option. What? You do not serve me. You sold me something. Why tip? Anywho, I did. Went out, pay my ticket to be shown how to reverse, welcomed by another tipping recipient in a paid parking area. Off to the gym. Did my thing. Needed to make calorie space for the donuts after all. And then I got a smoothie. I mean, we have to get excess calories to get us back to the gym, I guess. Then I must ask for a tip again. This time, not really inclined to. I didn't do it, and boy, did I feel it. This event triggered the curiosity which became the inspiration for this topic today. Why do we tip, and for what? Because it's clearly not a thing of graciously giving post-service delivery or product experience. It's become the norm for pre-delivery, pre-service, with kind of like no guarantee that the service will be great or the experience will be great at all. And this is the warning that I want to put out for companies. And we will get to the fact that you should tip, but differently. Differently from the consumer's point of view. So this is what I want to say to companies. Please understand that you might think you are a sole player in asking for it. But the consumer has a collective experience and collective emotion to all the experiences, like my mall trip. Charging $40 to $50 for a coffee and almost $100 for a smoothie and expecting a tip on that is arrogant. I'm not saying asking for a tip, I'm saying expecting a tip on that is arrogant. And when I say expect, believe me when I say it's imposed on. The look, the lack of smiling, the delivery, you feel it. To the company, I want to say you are risking a recurring sale by asking for it in advance. If you ask me for a tip before receiving my coffee, and my coffee is not right, or the experience was off, or the post-experience, I'm psychologically thinking I paid for a bad experience. Where it could have been I paid for a bad product only. Which is a massive player from a consultant point of view like myself to A, solve problems, and B, get customers to come back. Here's a tip that I want to give you. You always want to be in the position in a company to manage complaints live when they are hot. And I want to use this in the coffee shop analogy. I've mentioned it before. My dreams is to open up a couple of coffee shops myself, and this is on my personal notes, and I'm going to share it with you. You can copy and paste it. I don't care. Check the difference in mind. If I order a coffee and the first thing you ask me is what amount of tip you're going to give me, and I select a tip, right? Regardless of the amount, I select a tip. And my coffee burns my mouth, is horrible, is bad, the experience is bad, whatever. If there's anything bad happening in that unperfect kind of like delivery, imperfect delivery, I guess, at the end of the day. Do you think, and we've seen this, I see it when I work with companies' complaints to solve their complaints and get recurring customers coming back. Customers feel that you are not worthy to receive their complaint where they are. Emotionally, they vip themselves, they take their coffee and they leave, or they just maybe give a bad impact or review and they leave. Whereas, and here's a whereas, if you had a system, you order your coffee, you get your coffee, you pay for your coffee, and lastly, after you've taken a sip, you tip. Now, I know there's a kind of process in there. Immediately, if the experience in the product was good, you would tip. And immediately, and this is amazing, if the experience or product was bad and you feel that you don't want to tip thereof, the customer will put themselves in a position to live in the moment when it's hot tell you, sorry, I cannot tip you because of X, Y, Z. That is human behavior. Now you're sitting in a position where you can live, literally while it's hot, take a complaint and manage it accordingly. Whether it's fixing the error, whether it's giving a free one, whether it's just saying sorry, whether whatever the reason is, you now get the opportunity to solve that matter. And guess what? You're getting a recurring client that's coming back, that's going to pay every time for a great product. You can keep your staff accountable and they will tip linked to that. That makes a huge difference. When tipping was invented, it was invented for the post-delivery, the post-product, the gracious part of paying more than I had to based on XYZ. Not pre. Don't you come and YOCO me in my face and say, I want this amount, select your option. There are numerous ways of still allowing tips or offering them to your staff. The first, of course, is what are you tipping for each product sale? When don't I tip? And when shouldn't you? For the sake of psychology, this is going to be a touchy subject, but let's address the goal at the end of the day. The goal is, as a company, you want to be infinite. You want to be of service to your clients, and someone supporting the store is a client regardless if they tip. You do not want to be part of the greater psychological misfit when it comes to collective consumer experience, meaning if they had bad experience at all the other places on the tipping and you recreate that emotional bad experience for them at your store, you are now linked with that as well. So it's not about you doing your perfect delivery the whole time. It's about what the others did. And I kind of think that's unfair towards a company. You want to be positioned to address issues live. As I mentioned, without emotional blocks. You want to be excused on the credit card statement during budgeted times. $50 for a coffee versus $60 might not seem big on a one-time sale, but we all know no one drinks one a month, not even to mention one a day, and no one goes back at the budget and thinks, I can still actually have this only if I did not tip. It's a social judgment dilemma. So, personally, when don't I tip? Or rather, how do I tip? First things first. When it's at a market, we go to the Rainsford market quite often, where owners and founders sell their items, even their food. My support psychologically and from my intentions are to support their business, meaning the transactional part, the buying part. And usually, I do not tip. Yes, I'm sorry. I usually do not tip. But I actually ask them if it's their business and encourage them and applaud them. I actually really do have that conversation with them and applaud them in what they are doing. I generally have a conversation. But so many times I've walked into the market, see them 100% every time. got the YOCO machine. I'm not blaming YOCO on this. Great company, great product. They've just brought the solution for the entrepreneurs, for the staff members, for the tipping culture. But collectively, it's kind of now annoying. Now this owner is selling shawarmas at $150 for a small piece. That's fine. I get it. There's the value add. It tastes amazing. It's great. And the owner is standing there and asking me for a tip. I ask them straight, is this your store? Is this your product? Is this your company? They don't think the question's related. They usually go, yes, this is mine. I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to support you. I'm buying this. There's profits in your sale, hopefully. Otherwise, you're selling at losses. That's kind of like your problem. But I'm not going to tip you. I'm definitely not going to tip you additional for that. It doesn't make sense from my point of view, because you're also taking away budget to support someone else doing the same thing. Yeah. Then I guess the biggest inspiration for this entire thing is the tipping culture. So from coffee. So coffee, I've said this before. Yeah, this is how I do it with coffee. I'm kind of like a snob or bad with that. Apologies. So I tip when 5 consecutive experiences, 5 consecutive orders were successfully delivered to expectation. And then personally, I tip quite generously here. There's another episode that I talked about building capital, different capitals, and we're talking about community capital, community rapport. I use coffee shops as my personal model to do that. So in other words, I make sure my baristas know my name and trust me and build that. So when I meet clients there, you already have kind of like that community in buy. So when I say I tip generously, I do, but that's after 5 consecutive experiences. You can be at number 4 and you fail, we'll start all over again. And here's the thing, you might think I'm bad. I make this known to people. Okay. So that's how I do the coffee thing. The idea is to tip on the entire experience and the effort in delivery. That for me cannot be measured if you cannot receive anything yet. So doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to tip on something that, assuming you're going to have a good experience, assuming the product meets your expectations, that doesn't make sense to me. Restaurants, for me, it's 10% a standard with verbal affirmation to thank and encourage from a sincere heart. So I always tell the waitress or partners and say, listen, really thank you for this experience. This was great. This is things that wasn't that great, but I give that feedback live. I really feel I understand in their position. It's always a tip from my side. There's so many things that can go wrong. And if it's really wrong, it's a different story, but it's a different conversation. It's not just a vip myself and I'm out, different conversation. But on the 10% thing, I'm all for it. But then on top of the 10% and the sincere gratitude of saying thank you, there's a plus. If my kids were with me, I usually tip more to say sorry about the mess. Anything and anywhere else, I actually allow for the Holy Spirit to guide me and open my heart from moments of sacrificial giving. Sacrificial giving is when it costs me. In business terms, it's mentioned opportunity costing, meaning I cannot have another coffee, or I cannot do this, I cannot do that, because that money I'm not going to give graciously to someone. And you need to be open for that. You need to be open for the Holy Spirit to guide you in those terms. And that's just from a gracious point of view. Sometimes I tip by, or it's asking, what do they do, or what do they need, and how can I assist? For example, when I see the person serving me really has a bad day, and I know tipping will kind of like what they expect and they will do something, but I ask them, is there something I can assist you with? And sometimes they mention something, not always direct. I mean, you have your own compass and guidelines on how to do things, but sometimes they mention something that is of financial implication, or sometimes not, but it's really something that if you go out of your way, you should be able to help. So it's kind of like tipping relationally is also a massive part of that thing for me. But this is the one thing. I never, ever, 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 ever let guilt be the deciding factor, or or social norm be the deciding factor. Never, ever, ever, ever. We see the social norm is good service deserves good money. And the emotional pressure is fear of appearing rude or cheap. Now let's look at companies with weak or no tipping cultures, because we actually have to see what they do as well. The first thing is We can look at companies we've mentioned before like Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, France, Scandinavia, which includes Norway, Sweden, Denmark, China, Belgium, Netherlands. Why? First of all is hospitality staff earn living wages mandated by law. So their countries and governments look after them first. Then we see there's strong labor unions and service pride. We see historical pushbacks against class-based tipping. People feel offended if you pull that hierarchy on them. And then we see the national culture emphasizing equality, respect, and professionalism. So when we look at these type of countries, we see that optional at most. We see that tipping is a token of gesture, especially like if you just round up. And sometimes it's actually seen as disruptive or inappropriate. So tipping is great when done at the restaurant or gracious gratuity. I think that's where the word actually comes from, model. Let's expand further on the psychological and economics of tipping. In the psychology, tipping is driven by social obligation because people fear judgment. And boy, do we feel it in the stare, the goat stare. And then there's obviously the reciprocity norm. That's when, you feel like they served me well, I must return the favor, which is the main purpose of what it should be actually. We see that in psychology, we see the status signaling showing generosity or affluence. Generosity should be heart-born and not a status signaling. It's not about getting that loud clap and applause. It's about what it feels like in your heart, the joyful giver. We tip from a psychological point of view because there's guilt avoidance. People tip to avoid discomfort, not necessarily to reward a service, which is very dangerous because next time, even if you can afford to buy but cannot afford to tip, you would rather stay away. And then we see the reward theory. We tip more when there's emotional connection. And in fact, most tips are not based on service quality. And that is the conductor of bad reasoning. And although true, tipping should always be post-service, either you reward because of exceptional quality or you give unrelated to the experience or product from a gracious, joyful heart point of view. And in reality, we see it. We see the factors like attractiveness, friendliness, or even weather influencing tipping, more than performance. Tipping expectancy has become the norm, and that destroyed the intention and infinite cause behind it. So, psychology aside, let's look at the mechanistics. In this case, specific the measurables, the economics. Tipping lets companies lower base wages, especially in the USA, but especially in South Africa. Point proven. The outcome might be the same, but here is the emotional connection, or rather emotional balance or difference. Same outcome, different reason. Which one, when meant, practice, not just preached, is better? Is it this one? Tipping lets companies lower base wages, or tipping allows when companies can only afford certain wages for employees to be blessed. Customers end up subsidizing payroll. This creates inequality. Service and more than kitchen staffs, good-looking or charming staff, and more. Countries that abolished tipping, the normal tipping, typically saw that there's a high unity between teams, the kitchen and the front of house. There's a more stable income. There's a higher professional service quality. Servitude-focused, client-centered. Pride in workability and responsibility over expectancy to be pre-rewarded. Let me give you an example. Same on the coffee thing with the two Vidas. There's two things I want to mention on Vida still. One of my favorite brands in South Africa. I love a lot of coffee brands. I follow their strategies. I think not only because I'm a lover of their product, but to see how other cultures influence an entire new industry in South Africa, and also to see how there's a space for all of them, ironically. And each of them brings something quite new to the table. So I really follow their trends and what's working, what's not working. And from kind of like minor scale or a micro scale, microeconomic scale, meaning the specific restaurant, or a macro scale, the chain or the industry, if that kind of makes sense. So looking at 2 videos just here where I'm at. There's one at the garage, not too far from me. And then there's one at the gym side, which is a store. So the one's in the garage, and one is in the store. So what's amazing is the one at the garage actually loses out on a lot of tips. And here's why. Because you order at your video what you want to drink, they print you a slip, and then you need to go pay in the queue where you would pay for your normal consumables or fuel or whatever you want. You go there. And not at one point do they ask for tips, or because you can't pay them there, the counter sales, the point of sales at the counter doesn't ask for that upfront. So really it needs to come from your own ability, own gracious point. That team is flourishing. Everybody loves the team working there. Whenever you come and visit me, I'll take you there and you'll see it's just such a massive, great team atmosphere. Because they are centered around relationally serving their clients, not driven by any tips whatsoever. They can't be. Then on the other hand, you get the one down at the mall or at the gym. You go there, the first thing that they ask you is tipping point. Now, this is amazing. So what I haven't seen it in a lot of companies, but especially in Vida, I've seen this. So when they ask you for a tip, if the amount is less than $100, the tip amount is 10 Rand, 20 Rand, 30 Rand. It's in Rand increments. If it's more than $100, the tipping automatically changes to percentages. So in your mind, you're thinking 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. The one might be 10%. If it's greater than $100, it will always be more than 10 Rand. And the other one, you might order $30 coffee. You hit the 10, it's 10 Rand, so it will be $40. So it's massive from their side. They clearly had a sales consultant in that says, and this is how we're going to do it. It's smart, it's brilliant, it's great. If it was implemented post-sales or post-experience, not pre, because then it really is a budgeted upset, especially if you only buy one coffee. It becomes a very high-ticketed item. So I don't think they're always really thinking about that through, right? So that's just my opinion. And ironically, that is the one most where even if they try how hard, the consistency is just not there because they're sales oriented. We can see it in their structure of asking. We can see it in their smiles giving by the link to the amount of gratuity or tips that they received. And we can see that lacking when it's not there. Same company, same people. The one focus on servitude and the other one's focus on sales. And you kind of see the difference, not kind of, you clearly see the difference if you've been to both. And that's the example that I want to make. That's the warning I want to set out there to all of these different company cultures out there or companies, corporates out there, just asking for tips because everyone does it. And because thinking it is its own option to say no when it's psychologically not. Just as a side note, since everyone is saying Japan lives in 2050, maybe some nuggets of inspiration. Let's look at why Japan sees tipping as an insult. In Japan, tipping is not only uncommon, it's offensive. The reason, service is a point of personal pride. A Japanese server feels they should give the best service regardless of reward. Vida at the car or at the garage. 100% example of this. Money is not exchanged informally. Handing cash outside a formal transaction implies the worker is not already doing their job well enough, or you are trying to buy better treatment. Then there's a cultural value. I think I wrote it down here. I think just try and read it. Omotenashi. This means wholehearted hospitality. Service there is not only transactional, it's a moral standard. It disrupts the harmony. Unplanned money exchange can create awkwardness and imbalance. And Japanese businesses pay proper wages. Tipping is simply unnecessary. Here's a fun fact. Some Japanese servers will chase you down the street to return a tip because it's just, seen as a mistake. When we were there, I remember, I love art. I've said it so many times. I went to this, just before we got back onto the cruise ship, there was like all your vendors, what the local economy is selling, and this one selling this beautiful watercolor art piece. I asked how much, they gave me the price. I paid for it in full price, everything. They were so not shocked, but so thankful for you bartering their service with your money, respecting that change, that they said to me, just wait a minute. And they went out of their way to fold a type of origami spinner thing that I can give to the kids or whatever. Just that additional, just because to say thank you for this sale. It was a point of service. They didn't need to do that. It was brilliant. I was thankful for the picture. It was beautiful. It was just that extra servitude of showing thankfulness for the sale. And then obviously we need to look at how tipping impacts businesses and sale and culture. Let's look at the business impact, the positive in tipping cultures. Higher earnings for extroverted or high-performing staff, right? Companies save on payroll expenses, but one needs to ask if it's for the purpose of the growth, meaning getting more opportunities or creating more opportunities to be opened. Was it on a point of greed, getting the investors on their yacht? And we won't really know that. And then there's a negative. It creates income instability. It encourages short-termism, kind of like workers chase tables and not service excellence. Kitchen staff underpaid compared to service, and it leads to bullying, favoritism, and toxic competitiveness. Then we look at the sales impact. Tipping shifts the psychology of service. Staff act as salespeople who upsell to increase bill size and therefore tip size. It creates emotional manipulation. Friendliness becomes transactional. And just saying this, I feel like I'm ordering from Kauai right now. And this is truly my experience. Customers feel guilt-driven pressure. In a non-tipping culture, staff focus on service and not sales pressure. Customers experience smoother, calmer interactions, and upselling is done for value and not for income. Let's look at the cultural impact. Service workers often viewed as less than due to lower base wages. It creates a class divide. You serve me, and I reward you if you deserve it. It promotes consumer entitlement. I'm paying for your salary. And this is basically the concluding warning. The tipping should always be welcomed, unrelated to the product sale and based on an experience, emotional and psychological, I want to tip, not I have to. Because it's also not fair for a customer to feel entitled. And ironically, I know this is the voice behind this. I am a customer. I am entitled to tipping or not tipping as a choice. No, not at all. I am a client and I am entitled for the value linked to the payment. I am entitled to my perceived value and I'm obligated to have a gracious heart. You also, as a company, are entitled to receive money for the value offering and deserve not to be collectively emotionally judged on external matters that is outside of the value offering or outside of the product or service at hand. Non-tipping cultures do this. They service roles respected as real professions. We pay our people well because it becomes a point of pride. And customers and server relationships becomes more human and equal. I guess to bring it all in a nutshell, this is my warning and this is my recommendation out there. The first warning I want to give. Corporates, be careful to not implement or insist or enforce the habit of receiving tips prior to delivery of the service or the product. It is a very dangerous place to be because of A, you're not the only one that's doing it, and you're linking yourself into companies that's doing it unethically without a good heart. B, I want to encourage the consumer or the client that if you tip, do it with a gracious heart, Holy Spirit-led, graciously giving. So sometimes it's more, it's in abundance, it's at a cost point of view. Or B, from a point where it affirms and confirms the service quality received, not beforehand. And when you have a choice, you always tip the person that the corporates are taking advantage of in the service industry. The startup or entrepreneur, you're more than welcome to do so. But also remember that they get paid from their profits, and that's their business. No one tips me anything, right? And then lastly, sometimes the tip is really just your heart behind being an eternal or infinite customer to that company. So I know there's a lot of memes and things out there where when they say tip, you take your pen and you write down. And I actually sometimes do that. But sometimes it's just putting that aside and say, listen here, I cannot tip you, but I can thank you for this service. This was absolutely amazing. Or I cannot tip you because your service was not great. Take it upon yourselves to lecture them in a nice way and address the problem, not the person. That at the end of the idea is kind of like what it's all about. See you on the other side.
Welcome to yet another episode of Not Yet Mature. This is Not Yet Mature, and you are listening to Dion Richter. Thanks for being here. Please subscribe to our channels